Welcome to Midnight Whispers, the place where the cold breathes and the dark listens. Tonight we're bound for Alaska, land of endless snowfields, ghost towns under ice, and roads that end without warning. Up here, silence isn't empty, it's alive, waiting. The stories you're about to hear are true, drawn from legends, and whispered by those who swore they'd never tell. Subscribe now and tap the bell so the next time we drift into the cold, you're with us. Pull your blanket close, dim the lights, and let the first tale rise like a storm over the tundra. Story 1. Bleeding Mountain. The glacier started bleeding 3 weeks before the expedition vanished. And I was the only one who came back to tell what we found inside. My name is David Keller. I am a glaciologist. For 20 years, I have studied ice formations across Alaska, mapping how they move and change. In March 2023, a bush pilot radioed about something impossible in the Wrangell Mountains. A glacier was bleeding. Not metaphorically, actually releasing thick red liquid from deep within the ice. He sent photos, dark crimson streams flowing down pristine white slopes, like the mountain itself had been wounded. Our team reached the site 2 weeks later. 4 of us, me, Dr. Sarah Chan, a microbiologist, Marcus Webb, our climber and safety specialist, and Tom Kowalski, a documentary filmmaker. We set up base camp at the glacier's terminus where the ice met rock. The bleeding was worse in person. Multiple discharge points. Red liquid oozing from cracks in the ice face. It pooled on the ground in thick, viscous puddles that steamed in the cold air. Sarah collected samples immediately. We all expected iron oxide, mineral deposits, something rational. But when she ran the field tests, her hands started shaking. The liquid contained organic compounds, proteins, enzymes, things that should not exist in a glacier. She said it had properties similar to blood. But the cellular structure was wrong. Nothing matched any known organism. Marcus found the opening that same afternoon. A vertical shaft in the ice, maybe 10 feet across, perfectly circular, too perfect to be natural. The red liquid was flowing from somewhere deep inside. We anchored ropes and Marcus descended first to check stability. His voice crackled over the radio 20 minutes later. He said we needed to see this. All of us. The shaft went down 300 feet through solid ice. Our headlamps barely penetrated the darkness. The walls were smooth, almost polished, and they were warm, not melting, just radiating heat. Like the ice itself was alive, the red liquid seeped from thousands of tiny pores in the surface, bleeding through, dripping down, creating small streams that merged into rivulets. At the bottom, the shaft opened into a massive cavern, cathedral-sized. The ice walls glowed with a faint bioluminescence, blue-green light pulsing in slow rhythms. And in the center of the cavern, we found it. A mass, organic, enormous, maybe 60 feet across, embedded in the ice like a tumor in tissue. It was alive. We could see it breathing, the surface rippling with each slow inhalation. Veins running through it, thick tubes pulsing with red liquid, the same liquid bleeding from the glacier. This thing was pumping it, circulating it, like a heart pumping blood. Tom started filming. Sarah approached with her equipment. I just stood there trying to process what I was seeing. This was not an animal, not a plant. Something else. Something that existed in a category science had not named yet. Sarah took a tissue sample. The moment her scalpel touched the surface, the thing reacted. The entire mass convulsed, the pulsing accelerated, and the walls of the cavern began to shake. Ice cracked overhead. Chunks fell. Marcus yelled for us to move. We ran for the shaft, started climbing. The cavern was collapsing. Not naturally. The thing was doing it. Deliberately. We could hear sounds from below. Not wind, not ice shifting. Something organic, wet, breathing, growing louder. I made it up first, then Marcus. Tom was third, but Sarah was still halfway up when the rope went slack. I looked down. The shaft was filling with red liquid, rising fast, like the thing below was hemorrhaging, flooding the space. Sarah was swimming, trying to climb, but the liquid was thick, heavy. It dragged her down. Marcus and I pulled, hauled on the rope with everything we had. For a moment, I thought we had her. Then something pulled back. Something strong. The rope jerked. Sarah screamed. Not in pain, in terror, pure animal terror. Then she was gone, pulled under. The red liquid kept rising. We barely got the rope untied before it reached the surface. We sealed the shaft with explosives, brought down enough ice to bury it. Then we radioed for emergency extraction. The helicopter came the next day. But when we got back to Anchorage, nobody believed us. Sarah's body was never recovered. The incident was written off as a climbing accident. The samples she collected vanished. The footage Tom shot was confiscated for review and never returned. But I know what we found in that mountain. And I know it is still there. Still alive. Still bleeding. 6 months later, I got a call from a ranger in Wrangell. He said hunters had reported red snow near where we had been. Said it was spreading, covering larger areas, getting thicker. I told him to evacuate the region, to quarantine it. He laughed, said it was just algae. Red algae blooms. Happens sometimes, but I checked satellite imagery. The red area has grown 5 square miles in 6 months. And there are new vertical shafts appearing. More than a dozen now. All bleeding. All connected to something deep in the ice. I think the glacier is not just bleeding. I think it is feeding. That mass we found was not trapped. It was planted, growing, using the glacier as a body, using the ice as flesh. And now it is spreading. Slowly, methodically, sending out roots or veins or whatever that thing uses to move through frozen ground. I went back last month, alone, hiked to the original site. The shaft we collapsed was open again, cleared from inside, and there were tracks in the snow around it. Not animal tracks, something else, like someone had pressed hands into the snow. But the fingers were too long, too many joints. I looked down into the shaft. The red liquid was still flowing, but now there were shapes in it, floating just below the surface, human-sized, moving. I thought about Sarah, about how she was pulled under, about how she screamed. Then one of the shapes surfaced. It looked up at me with eyes that were not quite human anymore. Eyes that had been changed by whatever lived in that ice. It reached up with hands that were too long, too many fingers, and it smiled with a mouth full of teeth that had never been designed for smiling. I ran, did not stop until I reached my truck, drove 16 hours straight back to Anchorage. But I cannot stop thinking about what I saw, about how many shapes were floating in that red liquid, about how they moved with purpose, with intelligence. The thing in the glacier is not just alive. It is converting, taking what falls into it, changing it, making it part of itself. And Sarah was down there for 6 months before I saw what she had become. I am writing this because someone needs to know. The bleeding glacier in the Wrangell Mountains is not a natural phenomenon. It is a symptom, a warning. Something ancient has woken up in the ice. Something that has been frozen for thousands of years. And now it is thawing, growing, spreading. The red snow is appearing in new locations. The shafts are multiplying. And I think within a year, maybe 2, that thing will breach the surface completely. Will emerge from the mountain like a wound opening. And whatever comes out will not be something we can fight or contain or understand. I am leaving Alaska, leaving the country, putting as much distance between myself and that mountain as possible. But I know it will not matter. The ice is melting everywhere. Glaciers are collapsing worldwide. And I wonder how many other things like this are buried in frozen places. Waiting, bleeding, growing strong enough to finally break free and reclaim a world they lost millennia ago when the ice came and buried them alive. Story 2. Ground that screams. The first time I heard the tundra scream, I thought we had stepped on someone buried alive. It was August 1986, and I was working as a surveyor for an oil exploration company on Alaska, this North Slope. Middle of nowhere, endless flat wilderness stretching in every direction. No trees, no roads, just frozen ground, scraggly moss, and sky. We had been dropped by helicopter 3 days earlier to map potential drilling sites. Me and 4 other guys. Standard 2-week rotation. The scream came on day 4. We were walking in a line, about 20 feet apart, using ground-penetrating radar to check soil composition. I took a step and the earth beneath my boot shrieked. Not wind, not an animal, a human scream, high-pitched, desperate, like someone in agony. I jumped back. The sound cut off instantly. My heart was slamming against my ribs. I looked at the other guys. They had all stopped and were staring at me. Jenkins, our crew lead, asked if I was okay. I told him what I heard. He walked over to where I had been standing and stomped his boot down hard. Nothing, just the dull thud of rubber on frozen ground. He told me it was probably stress. The isolation getting to me. Told me to take a break and drink some water. I wanted to believe him. Wanted to think my mind was playing tricks. But I knew what I heard. That scream had come from beneath my feet, from inside the earth itself. We kept working, but I could not shake the feeling that something was watching us from below. Listening, waiting. That night, back at our temporary camp, I asked the others if they had ever heard stories about the tundra making sounds. Our equipment tech, a guy named Rollins who had worked the North Slope for 15 years, got quiet. He stared into the camp stove for a long moment, then said he had heard things. Not personally, but other crews had reported it. Areas where the ground screamed when you walked on it. Some guys refused to work those sites. Said the noise got inside your head. Made you hear things that were not there. Jenkins cut him off. Told him not to spook the new guys with ghost stories. But I saw the look that passed between them. They both knew something they were not saying. The next morning, we moved to a new survey grid about 3 miles east. The temperature had dropped overnight. The wind was brutal, cutting through every layer of clothing. We spread out and started our sweep. I took my first step and the ground screamed again. This time it was worse. Multiple voices, overlapping. Men, women, children, all screaming at once. The sound came from everywhere. Not just beneath my feet, but all around me. Like the entire tundra was alive and in pain. I stumbled backward and fell. The screaming stopped. Jenkins was running toward me, shouting something I could not hear over the blood pounding in my ears. When he reached me, he grabbed my shoulders and asked what happened. I could not speak, could not form words. I just pointed at the ground. He pressed his boot down slowly where I had been standing. His face went white. He heard it too. He backed away fast, nearly tripping over his own feet. Then he turned and yelled for everyone to return to camp immediately. We packed up in silence. Nobody asked questions. Nobody made jokes. We all knew something was deeply wrong with this place. The helicopter was not scheduled to pick us up for another 10 days, but Jenkins radioed for an emergency extraction. Said we had equipment failure. Said the site was not viable. The company pushed back, but Jenkins insisted. His voice shook when he talked to them. I had never heard him sound scared before. While we waited for approval, Rollins told us what he knew. Back in the early 80s, another crew had worked this same area. They reported the screaming too. Said it drove 2 guys completely insane. One of them walked out into the tundra in the middle of the night and never came back. They found his body 3 months later, frozen solid, hands clawed bloody like he had been trying to dig through the permafrost. The company buried the reports, paid off the crew to keep quiet, wrote it off as environmental stress and isolation psychosis. But Rollins had talked to guys who were there. They said the screaming was real. Said it sounded like people trapped underground. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Indigenous peoples had lived on this land for millennia. Ancient burial grounds dotted the tundra. And permafrost preserves everything. Bodies, voices, pain. Some scientists theorized that frozen ground could trap sound vibrations, lock them in place. And when pressure was applied, when someone walked on certain spots, those sounds could be released. But that did not explain why the screams sounded fresh, current, like whoever was making them was still alive down there, still suffering. We sat in our tents for 2 days, waiting for extraction approval. Nobody went outside unless absolutely necessary. And when we did, we moved carefully, testing each step before putting our full weight down. But the screaming had spread. It was everywhere now. Every few feet, the ground would shriek beneath us. Different voices, different tones, some angry, some pleading, some just raw, mindless agony. On the second night, I woke to find my tent empty. Jenkins was gone. I unzipped the flap and looked outside. He was standing about 50 yards away, illuminated by moonlight. Just standing there, motionless, staring down at the ground. I called his name. He did not respond. I grabbed a flashlight and walked toward him, placing each step carefully, trying to avoid the screaming spots. But there were too many now. Every step triggered something. Voices erupted beneath me in waves, overlapping, echoing, creating a chorus of suffering that made my teeth ache. When I reached Jenkins, he was crying, tears streaming down his face. He was staring at a spot on the ground directly in front of him. I shined my light on it. Nothing there, just frozen earth and moss. But when I looked closer, I saw impressions. Shallow depressions in the permafrost. Dozens of them, like handprints, pressed up from below. Jenkins whispered that he could feel them. Feel people underneath us, trapped in the ice. He said they had been there for centuries, buried during some ancient disaster. Flash freeze, avalanche, something that happened so fast they did not have time to die properly. They were suspended, caught between life and death, and the permafrost kept them that way, preserved their final moments forever. He said they were trying to get out, trying to claw their way to the surface, and our footsteps were waking them up, making them remember they were still down there, still trapped, still screaming. I grabbed his arm and pulled him back toward camp. He resisted at first, then followed. We did not speak the rest of the night. Just sat in our tents, listening to the wind and the occasional scream rising from the ground outside. The helicopter came the next morning. The pilot looked confused when he saw us. Said we looked like we had aged 10 years. We loaded our equipment in silence and climbed aboard. As we lifted off, I looked down at the tundra below. And I swear I saw movement. Ripples spreading across the frozen ground, like something underneath was shifting, reaching upward. The company never sent another crew to that site. Officially, they said the geology was unstable. Unofficial reports mentioned psychological hazards, extreme environment stress. But I knew the truth. That ground was screaming because something beneath it wanted out. Something that had been frozen in a moment of terror so profound it could not die, could not fade, could only wait in the ice and scream. I quit a month later. Could not take another field assignment. Every time I stepped on hard ground, I expected to hear that sound again. Expected to feel hands pressing up from below, trying to grab my ankles, trying to pull me down into the frozen dark where they waited. Last week, I got a call from Rollins. He said Jenkins had gone back, retired from the company and moved to a cabin near Prudhoe Bay. Said he could not stay away, could not stop thinking about the voices. Rollins tried to talk him out of it, but Jenkins insisted. Said the people under the ice needed someone to remember them, someone to bear witness. They found his body yesterday, frozen face down on the tundra, hands clawed into the permafrost. And according to the initial report, the ground around him was disturbed, like something had been trying to dig its way up from underneath, trying to reach him, trying to pull him down to join the others in their eternal frozen scream. Story 3. Silent airship on November 17, 1993. Every single person in McCarthy, Alaska saw the same impossible thing in the sky. And 30 years later, we still do not talk about what it meant. I was 36 years old, worked as a bush pilot flying supplies to remote mining operations. McCarthy was one of my regular stops. Population maybe 25 people. Old copper mining town deep in the Wrangell Mountains. No road access back then. You flew in or you walked. Most isolated place I ever worked. I landed around 3 in the afternoon. Clear sky, temperature just below freezing. Perfect flying weather. I was unloading cargo when Sarah Mitchell, who ran the only general store, came running out. Her face was white. She pointed at the sky and asked if I saw it too. I looked up, and my blood went cold. There was something hanging in the air above the town. Massive, maybe 300 feet long. Shaped like a cigar. Metallic surface reflecting the afternoon sun. It was not moving, not making any sound. Just floating there, perfectly still, maybe 1,000 feet up. An airship, but wrong. The proportions were off. No gondola, no propellers, no markings, just a smooth silver cylinder suspended in the sky like it had been photoshopped into reality. I stared at it for maybe 30 seconds before my brain caught up. I grabbed my radio and called Anchorage Flight Control. Told them there was an unidentified aircraft over McCarthy. The controller asked me to describe it. I did. There was a long pause. Then he told me there were no aircraft in that airspace. No flight plans, no radar contacts, nothing. I insisted I was looking right at it. He said he would check with military, told me to stand by. I kept staring at the thing. It had not moved, had not made a sound, just hung there, defying physics, defying explanation. Other people were coming out of buildings now. Everyone looking up, everyone seeing the same thing. Old Tom Hendricks, the mechanic. The Riley family who ran the lodge. Julie Chen, a seasonal park ranger. All of them staring, some pointing, some just frozen in place. I grabbed my camera from the plane, started taking pictures through the viewfinder. The airship looked even more wrong. The surface was too smooth, too perfect, like it was made of liquid metal. And there were no seams, no rivets, no panels, just one continuous surface. The radio crackled. Flight control came back. They had checked with Elmendorf Air Force Base. No military operations in the area. No experimental aircraft. They were sending someone to investigate, but it would take hours. They told me to keep watching, to document everything. I kept taking pictures. The airship did not move, did not change, just floated, silent, watching us watch it. Then something strange happened. The longer I stared at it, the more I felt like I was being pulled. Not physically, mentally, like my consciousness was being drawn upward toward that thing. I could feel it inside my head, searching, sorting through my memories, my thoughts, looking for something. I shook my head, broke eye contact, looked around. Everyone else seemed dazed, transfixed. Sarah was standing with her mouth open, tears running down her face. Tom was on his knees. Julie was backing away slowly, hands covering her ears like she was hearing something the rest of us could not. I yelled at them, told them to stop looking at it, to get inside. My voice seemed to snap them out of whatever trance they were in. Sarah blinked, looked at me, then looked back at the sky and screamed. The airship was changing. The surface was rippling, patterns moving across it like oil on water. And shapes were forming. Images, faces, hundreds of them. pressed against the metal from inside. Mouths open, eyes wide, screaming silently. I stumbled backward. My camera fell from my hands. The faces were people, real people, men, women, children, all trapped inside that thing, all trying to get out. Their hands pressed against the surface from within, clawing, desperate. And then I recognized one of them, my uncle, Robert Keller. He had disappeared in 1981 while flying cargo over the Brooks Range. His plane was never found. But there he was, pressed against the inside of the airship, mouth moving, trying to tell me something. I heard Sarah sob. She had recognized someone too. Her brother, missing since 1987, vanished while hiking the Chilcot Trail. And Tom was backing away, shaking his head, repeating that it was not possible. His daughter was up there. She had died in a plane crash in 1990. Everyone in McCarthy was seeing someone they knew, someone they had lost, all trapped inside that thing, all screaming silently. The airship began to descend, slowly, deliberately, coming down toward the town. The faces became clearer, more distinct. I could see my uncle, his eyes now, could see the terror in them, could see him mouthing my name over and over. People started running, scattering, trying to get inside buildings. But I could not move, could not look away. The airship was maybe 500 feet up now, close enough to see details, close enough to see that the metal surface was not solid. It was translucent, and inside, there were more people, hundreds, maybe thousands, all standing motionless, all facing downward, all staring at us. Then the pulling sensation returned, stronger, irresistible. I felt my feet leave the ground. Not dramatically, just an inch, then two. I was being lifted, drawn toward the airship. My uncle, his face was directly above me now. He was reaching down, trying to grab me, trying to pull me up to join him. I grabbed a fence post, held on. The pulling increased. My arms screamed with the strain. I looked around. Others were floating too. Julie was 3 feet off the ground. Tom was rising faster, already 10 feet up. Sarah was clinging to her porch railing. And then, as suddenly as it appeared, the airship was gone. Not fading, not flying away, just gone, erased from existence. 1 second it was there, the next the sky was empty. Everyone who had been floating dropped. Hard, I hit the ground and rolled. Pain shot through my shoulder. But I did not care. The thing was gone. We lay there in the dirt and snow, gasping. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. We just stared at the empty sky where the airship had been, where our lost loved ones had been, trapped and screaming. The military showed up 6 hours later, interviewed everyone, took my camera, confiscated all the film. They said it was mass hallucination, caused by atmospheric conditions, temperature inversion creating optical illusions, combined with isolation stress and suggestion. They had fancy names for it, fancy explanations, but they could not explain why all 25 of us saw the exact same thing. Why we all saw the same faces. Why we all felt the same pull. They classified it, told us not to talk about it, said it was a matter of national security. Most people in McCarthy left within a year, could not stay in a place where the sky had tried to swallow them, where the dead had reached down and tried to drag them up into that silent metal prison. I kept flying, but I never went back to McCarthy. And I started researching, found other incidents, other remote locations where people reported seeing airships that should not exist. Cimarron, New Mexico in 1967. Point Hope, Alaska in 1978. Barrow in 1982. Always small towns, always isolated, always the same description. Silent metallic cylinder, faces inside, the pulling sensation, and the people who went missing in those areas before the sightings. Hundreds of them over decades. Pilots, hikers, hunters, all vanished without a trace. No bodies, no wreckage, just gone. I think the airship is a collector. I think it moves through remote places, appearing when conditions are right, taking people when it can, storing them, preserving them. For what purpose? I cannot imagine. But they are still there, still conscious, still aware, trapped in that thing, unable to die, unable to escape, just floating forever in the silent dark. Last month, I got a call from a pilot friend. He was flying over McCarthy and saw something. A metallic object in the sky, silent, unmoving. He tried to photograph it, but his camera malfunctioned. When he looked again, it was gone. But for just a moment, he swore he saw faces pressed against the surface. Faces he recognized, including mine. I do not know what that means. I am still here, still alive. But maybe the airship does not just take bodies. Maybe it takes something else. Some part of us that gets copied, stored, added to its collection. And maybe that means I am in two places at once. Here on the ground, writing this, and up there in the sky, trapped in the metal, screaming silently, waiting for the next time the airship descends over some remote town to show the living what awaits them when they disappear into the wilderness and are never found. Story 4 to 1979 Anchorage Theater Incident. I found the film reel in my dead uncle's storage unit last week. 45 years of dust coated the metal canister, but the label was still readable. 4th Avenue Theater Security, October 13th, 1979. My hands haven't stopped shaking since I watched it. What everyone thinks happened that night, what the police reports say, what the newspapers printed, it is all wrong. The girl who vanished during that horror movie screening wasn't kidnapped. She was collected. My Uncle Frank was the head projectionist at the 4th Avenue Theater in Anchorage back in '79. Beautiful Art Deco building, pride of downtown, the kind of place that made going to the movies feel special. He never talked about why he quit, never mentioned the incident. Now I know why. The truth was eating him alive for 45 years, and now it was eating me. The canister was hidden inside a fake wall panel in his unit, along with notebooks filled with observations, newspaper clippings, and photographs that shouldn't exist. Photos of people who vanished throughout Alaska over 5 decades, all taken inside theaters, all showing the same figure in heavy winter gear standing behind them. A figure that nobody would ever see. I shouldn't have watched the reel. Should have turned it over to the police. But curiosity is a powerful drug, and my uncle, his final note, tucked inside the canister, begged me to understand before deciding what to do. He wrote that some truths are too dangerous to reveal, that some doors should never be opened. He was right. The footage starts normally enough. October 13th, a Saturday night, the theater packed for a midnight showing of some slasher film that was popular back then. The security camera covered the main auditorium from the projection booth, grainy black and white, but clear enough to see the rows of seats. Clear enough to see her. Sarah Morrison, 19 years old, University of Alaska student, sitting in row 12, seat 14. She was alone. That detail matters because the police spent months looking for whoever she came with. But the footage shows her entering alone, buying a single ticket, finding her seat alone. She was wearing a red sweater that looked gray in the monochrome footage, something my uncle noted because witnesses remembered it differently. They remembered her with friends. Memory is fragile when something wants to rewrite it. The movie started at midnight. By 12:15, you can see something wrong in the footage. People in the audience kept turning around, looking behind them, then facing forward again with confused expressions. Like they heard something but couldn't identify it. My uncle's notes mentioned the sound complaints from that night. Patrons reported a low humming, almost below hearing, that made their teeth ache. At 12:23, the figure appears. It doesn't enter through any door. One frame it is not there, the next frame it is standing in the aisle beside row 12. Heavy winter parka, the kind designed for Arctic expeditions, hood pulled up, face completely obscured. In October, inside a heated theater, nobody reacts to it. That is the first impossibility. 300 people, and nobody turns to look at this overdressed stranger standing perfectly still in the aisle. The figure stands there for 7 minutes, just standing, not swaying, not shifting weight, not breathing visibly. A human can stand that still. My uncle timed it, wrote extensive notes about the unnatural stillness. He became obsessed with that detail, filled 3 notebooks just analyzing those 7 minutes of footage. At 12:30, Sarah Morrison turns her head. Slowly, mechanically, like someone was rotating it for her. She looks directly at the figure. Her mouth opens, but not in surprise or fear. It opens too wide, impossibly wide, like her jaw had become unhinged. In that grainy footage, I swear I can see rows of teeth that weren't there before. Too many teeth. She stands up. The people beside her don't react. She steps into the aisle, movements jerky, puppet-like. The figure in winter gear extends one hand, and she takes it. They walk toward the emergency exit together. Nobody watches them leave. 300 people, and not one person notices a girl with an impossible mouth walking hand in hand with an Arctic explorer out of the theater. The police reports say witnesses saw her leave with someone. They gave conflicting descriptions: tall, short, male, female, young, old. The investigators blamed trauma, confusion, the darkness of the theater. But my uncle knew the truth. The witnesses were describing different people because the figure wanted them to. It could make people see whatever it needed them to see. My uncle followed the trail. Started investigating similar disappearances. Found a pattern going back to when the first movie theaters opened in Alaska. Always during horror films. Always someone young, alone, vulnerable. Always a figure in winter gear that didn't belong. Always the impossible mouth opening too wide before they left. He found Sarah Morrison, his roommate, interviewed her 20 years after the disappearance. The woman broke down, admitted something she never told the police. The night before Sarah vanished, she'd been practicing in their dorm room. Practicing opening her mouth wider and wider, measuring the gap with a ruler, crying when she couldn't to get it wide enough. When asked what she was practicing for, Sarah had said she'd been chosen for something important. Something ancient. The roommate showed my uncle a diary Sarah had hidden. Pages and pages of drawings. Tunnels beneath Anchorage. Vast chambers where things that weren't quite human stored their collections. Sarah had been dreaming about these places for weeks before she disappeared. Drawing maps to places that shouldn't exist. Writing about the beautiful music that only she could hear, calling her underground. My uncle spent decades mapping disappearances, trying to understand the pattern. The figure appeared roughly every 3 years, always in Alaska, always in theaters. He believed it was drawn to the collective fear generated by horror movies, that it fed on the concentrated terror of audiences. But it needed specific people, ones whose minds could be reshaped, whose bodies could be transformed into something useful for whatever waited below. He found 17 more cases between 1979 and his death last month. 17 people who vanished from theaters, leaving behind confused witnesses and impossible footage. Some left notes about the music only they could hear. Others were seen practicing that horrible mouth-stretching exercise. All of them drew the same tunnels in the days before they disappeared. 3 nights ago, I went to the abandoned 4th Avenue Theater. It's been closed since the early 2000s, but the city keeps talking about renovation that never happens. I broke in through a loading dock, made my way to auditorium with a flashlight in my phone. I needed to see the place for myself, needed to understand what my uncle had spent half his life investigating. The seats were still there, covered in dust and rot. Row 12, seat 14 had been removed, leaving a gap like a missing tooth. The emergency exit door that Sarah and the figure had walked through was welded shut. Someone had scratched symbols into the metal, symbols that hurt to look at directly. I was about to leave when I heard it, the humming my uncle described. Low, rhythmic, coming from beneath the floor. I found a maintenance hatch. Old locks broken years ago. The ladder descended into darkness far deeper than any basement should go. The humming grew stronger as I climbed down, vibrating through my bones, making my teeth ache. The tunnel at the bottom wasn't on any city blueprint. Smooth walls carved from stone that didn't match local geology. The humming was louder here, almost musical, almost beautiful. I followed it for what felt like hours, but my phone claimed was only minutes. Time moves differently down there. I found the chamber my uncle had theorized about. Vast, impossibly vast, lit by a source I couldn't identify. And they were there, all of them. Hundreds of people standing in neat rows, perfectly still, wearing clothes from different decades. Sarah Morrison was in the 3rd row, still 19, still wearing that red sweater. Her mouth was open, that impossible wide opening, and the humming was coming from all of them in perfect unison. The figure in winter gear stood at the center. It turned toward me, and for the first time in 45 years, pushed back its hood. The face underneath wasn't human, wasn't anything that should exist in our reality. It was a void shaped like a face, an absence that pulled at my vision, tried to drag my consciousness into it. It spoke without moving, words that appeared directly in my mind. It explained that they were collectors, preserving human potential at its peak. The disappeared weren't dead, weren't suffering. They were part of something larger, a living archive of human fear and possibility. The horror movies were hunting grounds, places where fear opened minds to new realities. Those who could hear the music, who could reshape themselves, were chosen for preservation. It offered me a choice. Join them willingly, become part of the collection, or leave and know that the collecting would continue. Every 3 years, another theater, another disappearance, another family destroyed by questions without answers. Or I could stay, let my mouth stretch wide, add my voice to their eternal song. I ran, scrambled up that ladder, out of the theater, drove until my car ran out of gas. But the humming followed me, follows me still. I could feel my jaw loosening, teeth multiplying in rows I shouldn't have. The music is beautiful now, calling me back to those tunnels, to that chamber where time stops and fear becomes art. My uncle, his final note makes sense now. He heard the music too, felt his body beginning to change. He spent 45 years fighting the call, documenting everything to leave a record before he gave in. His body was never found because he finally answered the humming. He's down there now, in those tunnels, part of the collection. I'm leaving this account on every platform I can find. The 4th Avenue Theater is being renovated next year. They will open those tunnels, find that chamber. Or maybe they won. Maybe the collectors will move deeper, find new theaters, continue their harvest. The figure in winter gear is already searching for the next venue, the next audience, the next person who can hear the music. My mouth is opening wider now. I can feel new teeth pushing through. The humming is so beautiful, so perfect. I understand why Sarah went willingly, why they all went willingly in the end. We not being kidnapped. We being preserved at our most terrified, most alive moment. If you ever in a theater and feel your teeth ache, if you hear humming below the soundtrack, if you see someone in heavy winter gear who shouldn't be there, leave immediately. Don, to look back. Don, to investigate. Because once you hear the music, really hear it, you all want to follow it down into those tunnels where the collectors wait. I'm going back tonight. My mouth is wide enough now. The music is calling, and I'm ready to sing. Story 5. Seward Highway Hitchhiker. The hitchhiker was already inside my truck when I woke up. I pulled over at mile marker 79 on the Seward Highway for a mandatory rest break, just past midnight. 20 years of long-haul trucking had taught me to catch sleep anywhere, so I reclined my seat and drifted off to the sound of rain hammering the cab. When my eyes opened 3 hours later, someone sat in my passenger seat, staring straight ahead through the windshield at the darkness beyond. My hand found the tire iron under my seat, but I didn't move otherwise. The figure wore a faded denim jacket, bell-bottom jeans, the kind of clothes I hadn't seen since I was a kid in the 70s. Water dripped steadily from his long hair onto my upholstery, but here, this is what made my blood freeze. The rain had stopped an hour ago. I could see stars through the windshield. The smell hit me next. Not death, exactly, but something older, like soil that had never seen sunlight, mixed with the copper tang of old pennies. My grandfather, his basement had smelled like that after the flood, when we found things in the walls that shouldn't have been there. I shifted slightly, and the figure turned its head toward me. Just the head, nothing else moving, like an owl tracking prey. The face looked young, maybe 20, with features that seemed familiar in a way I couldn't place. His lips moved, forming words with no sound, and I realized he was counting. His fingers tapped against his thigh in rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Over and over, then he pointed at the radio. My hand trembling, I reached forward and turned it on. Static filled the cab, but underneath it, barely audible, was a voice. My voice, from my CB radio conversation 3 hours earlier, playing back impossibly through the FM receiver. I heard myself telling another trucker about my route, my cargo, my next stop in Anchorage. The hitchhiker nodded slowly, still counting on his fingers, still dripping water that couldn't exist. I grabbed the door handle, ready to bail out into the Alaska night, but the locks engaged on their own. The kind of locks my 1994 Peterbilt didn't have. The hitchhiker's counting grew faster, his fingers now a blur of motion. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Then back to 1. The radio static cleared, and a different voice emerged. A young man, excited, talking about spring break 1978, about hitchhiking to Anchorage to surprise his girlfriend, about the nice trucker who picked him up at mile marker 79. The voice described my truck perfectly, down to the faded Grateful Dead sticker on the dashboard that I inherited from the previous owner. But my truck was built in 1994, 16 years after 1978. The hitchhiker stopped counting and stood up, his head passing through the roof of the cab like it wasn't there. His body followed, rising through solid metal, leaving only wet footprints that steamed in the cold air. Through the windshield, I saw him standing on the highway, that same denim jacket reflecting my headlights. He walked backward, maintaining eye contact, moving toward the tree line with steps that didn't match any human gait I'd ever seen. I fumbled with the ignition, my keys suddenly weighing 10 pounds each. The engine turned over just as the hitchhiker reached the guardrail. He pointed at something in the woods, and every instinct told me not to look, but I did anyway. There were dozens of them, all wearing clothes from different decades, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. All young, all male, all standing perfectly still among the spruce trees, watching my truck. Some were translucent, others solid enough to cast shadows in my headlights. A few still had visible injuries, crushed skulls, twisted limbs, dark stains spreading across their vintage clothing. The one in the denim jacket held up his hand, showing all 5 fingers. Then 4, then 3. I slammed the truck into gear and peeled out, tires screaming against wet asphalt. In my mirrors, the gathering followed, not running but somehow keeping pace, their forms flickering between the trees like a zoetrope animation. The speedometer hit 60, 70, 80. Dangerous speeds for that winding highway, but stopping meant joining them. 20 miles later, they vanished. 1 second they were there, the next, just empty forest. I pulled into a truck stop in Girdwood, hands shaking so bad I couldn't hold my coffee cup. The waitress, a woman who served me for years, took one look at my face and asked if I'd seen him. The hitchhiker, she meant. The one truckers had been reporting since 1978. She told me the story while I sat there, trying to stop shaking. David Prescott, age 20, University of Alaska student, disappeared March 15, 1978, last seen hitchhiking near mile marker 79. His body was never found, but truckers started seeing him within weeks. Always the same description: denim jacket, bell bottoms, long hair, constantly counting on his fingers. But here, it's what the waitress told me that changed everything. David Prescott wasn't the victim. The investigation had uncovered something else before being quietly shut down. Between 1965 and 1978, 17 young male hitchhikers had vanished along that stretch of the Seward Highway. All picked up by truckers. All last seen near mile marker 79. The police had suspected a serial killer working the route, possibly a trucker himself, but could never find evidence. Then David disappeared, and the vanishing stopped. The waitress leaned in close, her voice dropping to a whisper. She said the real drivers, the ones who'd been on this route long enough, believed something different. They thought David had been hunting the killer when he disappeared. His girlfriend had lost a brother to the highway 2 years earlier. David had spent months researching, riding with truckers, asking questions. The night he vanished, he told friends he knew who the killer was. I drove back to mile marker 79 the next morning, against every shred of common sense. In daylight, it looked like any other stretch of Alaskan highway. But I found something the investigators must have missed, or maybe couldn't see. Carved into a tree, so old the bark had nearly grown over it. DP March 15, 78. I found him. Below that, fresher carvings. Dozens of initials and dates, ranging from 1965 to 1978. The victims, marking their presence. And at the bottom, so new the sap still bled from the wounds in the bark. One more. Then it ends. I should have left Alaska after that. Should have sold my truck. Found work anywhere else. But I couldn't stop thinking about those wet footprints in my cab. About the counting. About the way he pointed at the radio. So I did something stupid. I researched every trucker who worked that route in the 70s. Most were dead or retired. But one name kept coming up in old logs, always near the dates of disappearances. Roger Dalton, still alive, 91 years old, living in a nursing home in Wasilla. Dementia had taken most of his mind, but when I visited, pretending to be a relative, he recognized something in me immediately. His clouded eyes sharpened, and he grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. He whispered numbers, 1 through 10, over and over, the same pattern the hitchhiker had counted. Then he said something that made my blood turn to ice. He said David Prescott had been his finest work. Said the boy had figured it out, had confronted him at mile marker 79. But Roger had been prepared, had turned the tables. He buried David differently than the others, used an old ritual his grandfather had taught him, something to keep the spirit bound to that stretch of road. Roger smiled then, a terrible expression on that ancient face. He said David was still out there. still counting. Counting down from the 17 he'd taken. Every time David appeared to a trucker, every time someone saw him in their cab, it meant one less year Roger had left. When the count reached 0, David would come for him. But here is the thing that haunts me most. Roger said David wasn't appearing to random truckers. He was appearing to descendants, blood relatives of the 17 victims, drawn to that highway without knowing why. He asked if I felt compelled to become a trucker, if the road had called to me since childhood. I had. It had. Roger laughed, a sound like grinding glass. He said I should check my family history, said I might find an uncle or cousin who disappeared in the 70s, written off as a runaway or dropout. Said David knew exactly who to appear to, who would listen, who would help him complete his count. I left the nursing home and drove straight back to mile marker 79. It was almost midnight, the same time I stopped there before. This time, I parked and waited, engine off, doors unlocked. The hitchhiker appeared at 12:47 a.m., materialized in my passenger seat like he'd always been there. He held up 2 fingers. 2 more years, then he showed me something else. In his other hand, a wallet, water damaged, falling apart, but I could make out a driver's license. The photo showed a young man who looked exactly like me at 20. The name was different, but the last name was familiar. My mother's maiden name. An uncle she'd never talked about. One who disappeared in 1977. The hitchhiker pointed at the glove compartment. Inside, I found something impossible, a notebook that hadn't been there before, filled with my own handwriting. Pages and pages of dates, names, locations, details about Roger Dalton I never researched, couldn't have known. The last entry was tomorrow, this date, and a single word, ready. I understood then, this wasn't random. David had been guiding me, all the truckers like me, the relatives of the lost. We were his countdown, his witnesses, his way of marking time until Roger's death would free him and the others. But more than that, we were his backup plan. The notebook contained everything needed to expose Roger Dalton, even after all these years. DNA evidence hidden in places only David knew. Photos Roger had taken, buried in steel boxes along the highway. Enough to ensure that even if Roger died peacefully in his bed, his legacy would be destroyed. His victims would be found, and their families would have closure. I turned to ask David something, but he was already gone. Only the notebook remained, heavy with purpose in my hands. Outside, snow began to fall, covering the highway in white. In my mirrors, I could see them again, the 17 victims, standing along the tree line, waiting. Tomorrow, I would drive to the first location in the notebook. I would start digging. I would find what David had left for me to find. And maybe, when Roger Dalton finally breathes his last breath, 18 spirits would finally be free to leave that horrible stretch of the Seward Highway. But tonight, I sat in my truck at mile marker 79, watching the snowfall, feeling the weight of family history I'd never known existed. The radio played static, and underneath it, if I listened carefully, I could hear David counting. 2, just 2 more, then it ends. If you're still listening, thank you. Midnight Whispers lives on your subscriptions and your stories. So hit subscribe, ring the bell, and tell us where you're watching from. Alaska's dark has a way of finding people, even far away. Story 6. Ghost Pipeline. I should have never taken that job in Alaska. But when you are staring down 42 with a failed marriage, 2 kids who barely return your calls, and a mortgage you cannot pay, you take what you can get. So when the offer came through to work a 6-month contract at Prudhoe Bay, one of the most remote oil fields on Earth, I said yes before I even looked at the paperwork. They flew me up in February. The darkness was total. Up there, the sun does not rise for months. You work, eat, and sleep under artificial lights, and after a while, you forget what real daylight feels like. The cold is not like winter back in Michigan. It is vicious. It bites through every layer you wear. The wind screams across the tundra like something alive and furious. But the money was good. Great, actually, and the work kept me busy enough not to think about everything I had lost. The rig was massive, a sprawling industrial complex of metal and machinery that groaned and hissed day and night. There were about 60 of us rotating through shifts. Most of the guys were quiet types, hard workers, men running from something, just like me. We did not talk much about our lives before. Up there, the past did not matter. Only the job. I had been there 3 weeks when I first heard about the ghost pipeline. It was during a meal break. I sat with a group of older guys who had been working the North Slope for years. One of them, a man named Carl with a graying beard and tired eyes, mentioned it casually, like it was common knowledge. He said that sometimes, when the fog rolled in thick, workers would see a pipeline that was not supposed to be there. It appeared out in the flats, a few miles from the main facility. A perfect stretch of industrial pipe, gleaming and new, running parallel to the horizon. I laughed, told him it was probably just the real pipelines playing tricks in the fog. Light refraction or something? Carl did not laugh back. He just stared at me with this blank expression and said that the pipeline they saw was not on any map, not on any blueprint, and when people got close enough to touch it, they heard things. Mechanical sounds that did not match any equipment we used, and voices, human voices, speaking backwards. Nobody else at the table said anything. They just kept eating. I thought it was hazing, a story to spook the new guy. But Carl was not the joking type, and the silence from the others made my skin crawl in a way I could not explain. 2 nights later, the fog came. It rolled in just after midnight, thick and gray and heavy. The kind of fog that swallows light. I was finishing my shift, doing a routine check on one of the peripheral pump stations about 2 miles from the main rig. The cold was worse than usual. My breath came out in clouds so thick I could barely see my own hands. That was when I heard it. A low, rhythmic hum. Steady, mechanical. It sounded like it was coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. I stopped walking and listened. The hum grew louder, then softer, like something breathing. I turned in a slow circle, trying to pinpoint the direction, but the fog made it impossible. Then I saw it, a pipeline, stretching out into the fog maybe 100 yards ahead of me. It looked brand new. The metal gleamed dully under the weak floodlights. It was elevated on support beams, just like the real ones, but something about it felt wrong. The dimensions were slightly off, the rivets too clean. The whole thing had an unnatural stillness to it, like it was a photograph instead of a real object. I radioed back to the main facility, told them what I was seeing. The dispatcher sounded confused, said there was no pipeline in that sector. I told him I was looking right at it. He paused for a long time, then told me to return to base immediately. But I did not move. I did not know why. Curiosity, maybe, or stubbornness. I had spent my whole life being the guy who did not believe in ghost stories. I was not about to start now, so I walked toward it. The hum grew louder with every step. It was not just mechanical anymore. There was something underneath it, a vibration that I felt in my chest, in my teeth. It made my head ache. The fog seemed to thicken around the pipeline, like it was protecting it, hiding it. When I got within 50 feet, I heard the voices. They were faint at first, muffled, like people talking through a wall. I stopped and listened. The voices were layered, overlapping, speaking in a rhythm that felt intentional but made no sense. And then I realized what Carl had meant. They were speaking backwards, not gibberish, actual words, reversed. I could almost make them out. Almost. It was like listening to a recording played in reverse, but with intention behind it. With meaning. My hands were shaking. I told myself it was the cold. But I knew better. I took another step forward. The hum became deafening. The voices grew clearer. I still could not understand them, but I felt them. Felt the weight of whatever they were trying to say pressing down on me like a physical force. And then I saw the figure. It stood beside the pipeline, motionless, dressed in the same orange cold weather gear we all wore. The hood was up, face hidden in shadow. It did not move, did not react to my presence. Just stood there, facing the pipeline like it was waiting for something. I called out. My voice sounded small and hollow in the fog. The figure did not respond. I stepped closer, slowly. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to turn around and run. But I could not. I had to know, had to see. When I was 10 feet away, the figure turned its head toward me. There was no face, just smooth, empty darkness where a face should have been. No eyes, no mouth, nothing. I stumbled backwards. My boot caught on something and I fell hard onto the frozen ground. The impact knocked the wind out of me. I gasped, struggling to breathe. And when I looked up, the figure was gone. So was the pipeline. The fog was still there, thick and impenetrable. But the hum was gone. The voices were gone. There was nothing ahead of me but empty tundra. I scrambled to my feet and ran. I did not stop until I reached the main facility. My lungs burned. My legs felt like they were going to give out. When I burst through the door, the dispatcher stared at me like I had lost my mind. I tried to explain what I had seen. He did not believe me. Nobody did. They said it was exhaustion, isolation, the darkness playing tricks. They told me to take the next day off and get some rest. But I knew what I had seen. Over the next 2 weeks, I heard more stories. Quiet conversations in the break room, whispers in the hallways. Other workers had seen the pipeline. Some had heard the voices. One man, a drill operator named Mike, said he had touched it. Said the metal was ice cold and vibrated under his hand like it was alive. He quit 3 days later, packed his things and left without saying goodbye. I wanted to leave too, but I needed the money. So I stayed, and I tried to forget, but the pipeline did not forget me. It appeared again a month later. Same fog, same hum. This time I was with another worker, a younger guy named Travis. We were doing a fuel check at one of the outer stations when he grabbed my arm and pointed. There it was, the phantom pipeline, gleaming in the fog. Travis saw it too. That was the worst part. Knowing I was not crazy. Knowing it was real, we did not approach it. We just stood there, frozen, listening to the hum and the voices. Travis started crying. I did not blame him. There was something deeply, fundamentally wrong about that thing. Something that made your brain reject it on a primal level. We radioed back and waited for a truck to pick us up. Neither of us spoke during the ride back. Travis requested a transfer the next day. I should have done the same, but I did not, because I started having dreams. In the dreams, I was standing beside the pipeline. The fog was gone. The sky was black and empty, and I could hear the voices clearly. They were not speaking backwards anymore. They were speaking to me, telling me things about the rig, about the men who worked there, about accidents that had happened years ago, men who had died, men whose bodies were never found. They told me that the pipeline was not a pipeline. It was a monument, a marker, a boundary, and I had crossed it. I woke up every night drenched in sweat, my hands shaking, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might explode. I stopped sleeping, started drinking coffee by the gallon just to stay awake, because the dreams were getting worse, more vivid, more real. In one dream, I saw the faceless figure again. It stood in the middle of the tundra, surrounded by dozens of others just like it, all wearing our gear, all motionless, waiting. I woke up screaming. The company doctor said it was stress, prescribed me sleeping pills. I did not take them. I knew pills would not fix this. 2 months into my contract, the fog came again, thicker than ever. It rolled over the facility like a living thing, swallowing buildings whole. Visibility dropped to zero. All non-essential work was suspended. We were told to stay inside, but I could not, because I heard it, the hum, louder than it had ever been. It was coming from inside the building, vibrating through the walls, through the floor. I looked around at the other workers. None of them seemed to hear it. I walked out into the fog. I do not remember deciding to do it. One moment I was inside. The next I was standing in the freezing darkness, surrounded by nothing. The hum was everywhere. Inside my head, inside my chest. I followed it, and I found the pipeline. It was closer this time, right at the edge of the facility. The fog parted around it like a curtain, and standing beside it were the figures. Dozens of them, all faceless, all motionless. They turned to look at me. I tried to run, but my legs would not move. I was frozen, paralyzed. The hum grew deafening. The voices screamed in reverse, and one of the figures stepped forward. It reached out with one hand, and I understood. The pipeline was not a monument. It was a trap, a lure. It appeared to those who were lost, those who were running from something. And when you got close enough, when you let your guard down, it took you. The figure's hand touched my shoulder. Everything went black. I woke up 3 days later in the medical bay. They said they found me unconscious in the snow, half frozen. Said I was lucky to be alive. I did not feel lucky. I finished my contract, flew home, tried to go back to my normal life. But I still hear it sometimes. Late at night, when the house is quiet, the hum, faint and distant, and I know that somewhere out there in the fog, the pipeline is waiting for me to come back. Story 7. Barrow Research Station Incident. The drawing was on my hand when I woke up, carved into my skin with something sharp enough to bleed but not deep enough to scar. I had no memory of how it got there. No memory of the pain it must have caused. No memory of the previous 3 days. Just the symbol, intricate and alien, etched into my palm like a brand that refused to fade. And when I looked around the room at the 5 other researchers staring at their own hands with the same horror I felt, I knew we were all marked by something we could no longer remember. My name is David Marsh, and I was the station coordinator at Barrow Arctic Research Facility in February 1992. Our mission was straightforward: monitor atmospheric conditions, collect ice core samples, track wildlife migration patterns. Standard climate research that had been conducted at this location for nearly 20 years without incident. We were supposed to be there for 6 months. We lasted 4. The last thing I clearly remember before the blackout is Tuesday, February 11th, at approximately 9 in the evening. I was in the common area reviewing supply inventory logs while Dr. Sarah Chen worked on atmospheric data at the computer terminal. The wind outside had picked up to 70 miles per hour, standard for an Arctic winter storm, and the station creaked and groaned under the assault. We were completely isolated, the nearest settlement 40 miles away across frozen tundra, accessible only by snowmobile in good weather. The weather that week was not good. We had lost radio contact with the outside world 3 days earlier when the storm knocked out our antenna array. Not unusual. Storms this far north could last a week or more, and we had backup generators, enough food for 3 months, and protocols for extended isolation. We were prepared for everything except what happened next. My next clear memory is Friday, February 14th, at 6 in the morning. I came to consciousness on the floor of the research lab, my cheek pressed against cold linoleum, my right hand throbbing with a pain that felt both fresh and old at the same time. The lights were on but flickering, and the room smelled wrong, like copper and burnt plastic and something organic I could not identify. I sat up slowly, every muscle in my body aching like I had been working manual labor for days without rest. That is when I saw the symbol on my hand. It was roughly circular, about 2 inches in diameter, composed of geometric patterns that seemed to shift when I looked at them too long, lines connecting to form shapes that my brain could not quite process. It was not any language or symbol system I recognized, and I had studied enough archaeological sites to identify most ancient writing systems. The others were scattered throughout the station in various states of confusion and distress. I found Dr. Chen in the break room, sitting at the table with her head in her hands, weeping silently. Her left palm bore the same symbol. Dr. James Howard was in his quarters, curled on his bunk, staring at the wall with empty eyes, and the mark burned into his right forearm. Lisa Park, our wildlife biologist, was in the equipment bay, repeatedly washing her hands in the utility sink, scrubbing at the symbol that refused to fade. Marcus Webb and Tom Richardson were together in the communications room, sitting in front of dead monitors, each marked on their palms. None of us could remember anything from the past 72 hours. We gathered in the common area and tried to piece together what had happened. The station logs should have provided answers, but they only deepened the mystery. Every research journal, every data entry log, every personal notebook contained the same thing. Pages and pages of the symbol, drawn over and over in increasingly elaborate variations. Some were small and precise, others sprawled across entire pages, drawn with such force that the pen had torn through the paper. The handwriting was ours. We could all identify our own distinctive styles, but none of us remembered writing any of it. The video surveillance system had been disabled manually from the inside. Someone had physically removed the hard drives from the recording equipment and destroyed them. The fragments we found in the trash had been shattered with a hammer we could not locate. Whoever had done it knew exactly how to erase all evidence of those missing days. But they had missed something. The external weather camera, mounted on the roof and connected to a separate system, had continued recording. The footage was corrupted, most of it unusable, but there were brief moments of clarity that showed us things we could not explain. At 2 in the morning on February 12th, all 6 of us walked out of the station into a blizzard with winds strong enough to knock a grown man off his feet. We wore no protective gear, no parkas or insulated boots, just our regular indoor clothing. The thermal cameras showed our body heat signatures moving in a straight line away from the station, walking in perfect formation toward the northern ice fields. We walked for exactly 1 mile before the footage became too corrupted to make out details. 4 hours later, we returned. Same formation, same mechanical precision in our movements. But the thermal imaging showed something impossible. Our body temperatures had dropped to 70 degrees Fahrenheit. We should have been dead from hypothermia. Instead, we walked calmly back to the station and disappeared inside. This pattern repeated for 3 consecutive nights. Same time, same direction, same impossible survival in sub-zero temperatures. And each time we returned, our body temperatures were lower. By the 3rd night, the thermal cameras barely registered our presence. We were nearly as cold as the surrounding ice. Dr. Howard was a medical doctor before switching to climate research. He examined each of us thoroughly, looking for signs of frostbite or tissue damage from hypothermia. We should have lost fingers and toes at minimum, should have shown signs of severe cold exposure. But our bodies were perfectly healthy. Better than healthy, actually. Several minor health issues we had been dealing with, small injuries and chronic pains, had completely healed. Lisa, a sprained ankle from a fall 2 weeks earlier, showed no signs of ever being injured. The scar on my forearm from a childhood accident had faded to nearly invisible. Something had happened to us during those walks into the frozen darkness. Something had changed us, healed us, marked us, and we could not remember a single moment of it. The symbol haunted every waking hour. We found it everywhere in the station once we started looking. Scratched into the metal walls of the corridors with tools from the equipment bay. Traced in frost on windows. Burned into the wooden table in the break room with what appeared to be a soldering iron. Someone, or all of us together, had spent those 72 hours obsessively reproducing this image throughout the entire facility. Dr. Chen, who had studied ancient languages as part of her anthropology background, spent hours analyzing the symbol, comparing it to every database and reference book we had on site. It matched nothing. Not Sanskrit, not cuneiform, not any indigenous Arctic writing system. It was not astronomical, not mathematical, not biological. It existed outside every framework of human knowledge we could access. But it meant something. We all felt it instinctively. When we looked at the symbol, something in the back of our minds stirred, like a memory trying to surface but blocked by an impenetrable barrier. It was the mental equivalent of a word on the tip of your tongue, except the word was in a language you had never learned and the memory belonged to someone else. The dream started on the second night after we regained consciousness. Not nightmares exactly, because nothing overtly frightening happened in them. We were simply walking across the ice under a sky that was wrong, filled with colors that did not exist in normal light spectrum and patterns of stars we did not recognize. We walked towards something massive in the distance, a structure or formation that was both impossibly far away and immediately close, something that hurt to look at directly because the geometry was wrong, because it existed in dimensions our eyes were not designed to perceive. And we were not alone on these walks. Something walked beside us, around us, through us. We could not see it clearly, could only sense its presence like a pressure change before a storm, like the feeling of being watched from just outside your peripheral vision. It was patient and ancient and completely focused on us, studying us with the detached interest of a scientist examining bacteria under a microscope. The worst part was that in the dreams, we were happy. We walked willingly toward that impossible structure with the eagerness of pilgrims approaching a shrine. Whatever had happened during those 72 hours, we had wanted it. We had participated voluntarily in something we could no longer remember or understand. Tom Richardson broke first. On the third day after waking, he barricaded himself in his quarters and refused to come out. Through the door, we could hear him talking to himself in a language none of us recognized. His voice rising and falling in rhythmic patterns that sounded almost like a prayer or incantation. When we finally forced the door open, we found him sitting in the corner, his entire body covered in the symbol. He had used a knife to carve it into his arms, his legs, his chest, shallow cuts that wept blood but seemed to cause him no pain. His eyes were completely black, pupils dilated so wide they swallowed the iris, and he smiled at us with an expression of serene contentment that was more terrifying than any scream. He spoke in that unknown language for 6 hours straight before collapsing from blood loss. Dr. Howard stabilized him, bandaged his wounds, sedated him heavily. But even unconscious, Tom continued to mouth the words, his lips moving in that same rhythmic pattern. And worse, the rest of us understood him. We could not translate the words into English, could not explain their meaning, but we felt the intent behind them. He was calling to something, inviting it back, begging it to finish what it had started. We needed to evacuate immediately. The storm had finally passed, leaving clear skies and temperatures that had risen to a survivable -20 degrees Fahrenheit. We could make it to the nearest settlement if we left right away, before another weather system rolled in. But when we tried to start the snowmobiles, we discovered they had been sabotaged during our blackout period. Every engine had been systematically dismantled, key components removed and hidden throughout the station in places that would take days to search. Someone during those 72 hours had ensured we could not leave. The radio equipment had been similarly destroyed, circuit boards removed and crushed, wiring cut in dozens of places. We had no way to call for help and no way to transport ourselves to safety. We were trapped at the station until the scheduled supply run in 3 weeks, assuming the pilots did not delay due to weather. That night, the temperature inside the station began to drop despite the heating system running at full capacity. Within 2 hours, it fell from a comfortable 68 degrees to 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Ice formed on the interior walls. Our breath came out in thick clouds. We piled on every layer of clothing we could find, but the cold seemed to penetrate through fabric and insulation, settling deep into our bones. The symbol on my hand started to burn, not with heat, but with cold so intense it felt like fire. I looked at the others and saw them clutching their marked flesh with the same agony. The symbol was glowing faintly in the darkness, emitting a pale blue light that pulsed in rhythm with our heartbeats. Something was coming back for us. I could feel it approaching from the north, moving across the ice with the inexorable patience of a glacier. It had marked us as its own during those lost 3 days, had changed us in ways we were only beginning to understand, and now it was returning to collect what it considered rightfully claimed. Dr. Chen suggested we burn the station down, destroy the symbols, eliminate any connection to whatever we had encountered. But Lisa pointed out the fatal flaw in that plan. The symbols were not just on the walls and in our notebooks. They were carved into our flesh, etched into our very cells. We could not destroy the connection without destroying ourselves. Marcus had a different theory. He believed we had been chosen for something, that whatever entity we encountered had selected us specifically for our knowledge and skills. 6 researchers with expertise in climate, biology, medicine, engineering, and communications. We were not random victims. We were tools being prepared for a purpose we did not yet understand. The lights went out at midnight, all at once throughout the entire station, despite the backup generators. We huddled together in the common area with flashlights and emergency lanterns, listening to the wind pick up outside. Except it was not just wind. There were other sounds mixed in, rhythmic and patterned, like the language Tom had spoken, but deeper, resonating at frequencies that made our teeth ache and our hearts stutter. The exterior door opened by itself. We had locked it, barricaded it with furniture, but it swung wide anyway, admitting a blast of Arctic air and something else. Something that made the temperature plummet another 30 degrees in seconds, that turned our breath to ice crystals before it left our mouths. We could not see what entered the station, not directly. Our flashlights revealed nothing but swirling snow and darkness, but we could feel it moving through the corridors, room by room, searching or cataloging or simply observing us with that same alien attention from the dreams. The symbols on our hands burned brighter, and I felt an overwhelming compulsion to walk toward the open door, to go back out onto the ice and finish whatever we had started 3 nights ago. The others felt it too. I watched them struggle against the pull, saw Sarah grip the table so hard her knuckles went white, saw Marcus bite through his own lip trying not to move. Only Tom seemed at peace. He stood calmly and walked toward the door with that same mechanical precision from the surveillance footage. We tried to stop him, grabbed his arms and pulled him back, but his strength was impossible. He moved forward, dragging all 5 of us behind him like we weighed nothing. And as he reached the threshold, he turned back to look at us with those completely black eyes and smiled. Then he stepped out into the darkness and was gone. The door slammed shut. The temperature returned to normal. The lights flickered back on, and we stood there in shock, realizing we had just lost one of our own to something we could not fight or even fully perceive. The rescue team found us 4 days later when we failed to make our scheduled radio check-in. They discovered 5 researchers suffering from severe psychological distress and exposure to unknown trauma. Tom Richardson was never found. Search teams combed the area for weeks but discovered no trace of him, no footprints, no body, nothing to indicate where he had gone after walking out of the station. The official report classified the incident as a case of shared psychosis brought on by isolation and extreme environmental stress. The symbols were dismissed as delusional artwork. The surveillance footage was labeled corrupted and unreliable. Our testimony was considered evidence of mental breakdown rather than actual events. They sent us all to different facilities for psychiatric evaluation and treatment, ensuring we could never compare notes or build a cohesive account of what really happened. But I know the truth. We all do. Something old and patient and utterly inhuman exists in the Arctic darkness, something that noticed us when we ventured into its territory, something that marked us as its own and changed us in ways we are still discovering 30 years later. The symbol has never faded from my hand. Neither have the dreams. And every winter, when the temperature drops and the nights grow long, I feel that pull toward the north, that whisper in a language I should not understand, calling me back to finish what was started in those 72 lost hours at Barrow Research Station. 5 of us survived. 5 of us carried this mark, and I think we were meant for something terrible. Story 8. Invisible siege. I should have known something was wrong when I found the first photograph. It was tucked inside a waterlogged notebook I discovered while cleaning out my uncle's house in Larsen Bay, Alaska. He had died 3 weeks earlier, alone in that place, and someone had to deal with his things. That someone was me. The photograph showed the entire village gathered in the town square on what looked like a bright summer day. Everyone was looking up at the sky with expressions of absolute terror frozen on their faces. On the back, written in shaky handwriting, were 4 words. They came in daylight. My uncle never talked about his time in Alaska. 23 years he lived there, working the fishing boats around Kodiak Island. And in all those years, he called home exactly twice. Both times, my mother said, he sounded distant, haunted. When I asked her what he ran from, she just shook her head. Now I was standing in his cramped living room, surrounded by boxes of his possessions, holding evidence of something I did not understand. The notebook was filled with dates and times, entries that made no sense. 3:17 a.m., heard them in the walls again. No one believes me. Another one. The whole town saw them today. Finally. But now I wish we hadn't. The entries stopped abruptly in late August of 2001. After that, just blank pages, except for one sentence scrawled across the final page in letters so hard-pressed they had torn through the paper. We brought them back with us. I am not a superstitious person. I work as an insurance adjuster in Portland. My life is spreadsheets and claim forms. But something about that notebook made my skin crawl in a way I had never experienced. I spent that first night reading through every page, trying to piece together what had happened to my uncle. The more I read, the less sense it made, and the more I needed to understand. The next morning, I started making calls. The Larsen Bay Harbor Master, the local historical society, anyone who might remember August of 2001. Most people did not want to talk about it. One woman hung up the moment I mentioned the date, but eventually, I reached an old fisherman named Dale who had worked the boats with my uncle. His voice was rough, damaged by decades of cigarettes and salt air. You really want to know about that? He asked. Because once I tell you, you can unhear it. Can unknow it. I told him I needed to understand what happened to my uncle. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing, considering. It started with the nets, he finally said. We were pulling them up after a night run, and they were shredded. Not torn, shredded, like something had gone through them with surgical precision. But there was nothing in the water. Nothing we could see, anyway. Then the fish started appearing on the docks. Gutted, arranged in patterns, circles and spirals. No blood, just the patterns. My hand holding the phone began to shake. I pressed it harder against my ear. We thought it was vandals at first, Dale continued. Kids from Kodiak City, maybe, coming over to mess with us. But then people started seeing things. Movement in their peripheral vision. Shadows that did not match any light source. And the sounds. God, the sounds. Like breathing, but not human. Not animal, something else. It came from everywhere and nowhere. He paused, and I heard him take a drink of something. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. August 17th, that was the day it all came apart. I was down at the harbor with maybe 15 other fishermen. Beautiful morning, clear sky, calm water. Then someone screamed. We all looked up, and we saw them. Except we did not see them. Does that make sense? We could perceive them. We knew they were there. Hundreds of them, thousands maybe, moving through the air like schools of fish. But when you tried to focus on one, there was nothing. Just the feeling of something watching you. Something massive. My mouth had gone dry. I tried to speak but could not form words. Within an hour, the whole village was in the square, Dale said. 312 people. Everyone who lived in Larsen Bay. We all stood there, watching these things we could not see circle above us. Some people were crying. Others were screaming. A few tried to run, but they always came back, like something was hurting us, keeping us together. We stayed there for 6 hours, just standing, watching, feeling them watch us back. What were they? I managed to ask. Nobody knows. Around sunset, they left, just like that. One moment we were surrounded, and the next, they were gone. But something changed in all of us that day. Something broke. Your uncle, he was the worst. He became obsessed, started saying they were not gone, that they had just learned how to hide better. I asked Dale if anyone reported what happened, if there was any official record. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Who would believe us? Mass hallucination, they said. Something in the water, stress from the fishing season. They sent a psychologist out from Anchorage. She talked to a few people, wrote a report, and left. Called it collective hysteria. But she was wrong. We all knew she was wrong. After I hung up, I sat in my uncle's house for a long time. The afternoon light coming through the windows seemed wrong somehow. Too bright, too normal. I found myself watching the corners of the room, looking for movement that should not be there. That night, I could not sleep. I kept thinking about the photograph. About 300 people standing in a town square, looking up at nothing. About my uncle spending 22 years in this house, alone, convinced that invisible things were watching him. I got up around 2 in the morning and started going through more of his belongings. In a locked drawer in his bedroom, I found a shoebox filled with more photographs. They were all the same. Pictures of empty spaces, the harbor, the forest behind the village, the interior of this very house. But in each photograph, something felt present. The images had a weight to them, a wrongness. I realized my uncle had been trying to capture them, trying to prove they were still there. Underneath the photographs was a map, not of Larsen Bay, of Portland, my city, my home. He had marked locations all over it with red X marks. My apartment building had 3 X marks beside it. The coffee shop where I got breakfast every morning had 5. My office had 9. Written across the top of the map in my uncle's handwriting. They followed me. Now they are spreading. I dropped the map like it was on fire. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. This could not be real. My uncle had been sick, paranoid, mentally ill. That was the only explanation that made sense. But then why could I feel something watching me right now? Why did the air in the room suddenly feel thick and difficult to breathe? I grabbed my phone and called Dale back. It was 4 in the morning in Alaska, but he answered on the second ring. Like he had been waiting. You found the map? He said. It was not a question. How did you know? Because he sent me one too. For Kodiak City. And I found the X marks, just like he said I would. Places where they gather, where you can almost see them if you look the right way. This is insane, I said. This is not possible. Then explain why 16 people have disappeared from Kodiak Island in the last 5 years, Dale said. Explain why every single one of them was last seen near a location marked on your uncle's maps. Explain why I can hear them breathing in my house right now. In the walls, in the ceiling, everywhere. The line went dead. I tried calling back, but it went straight to voicemail. I stood there in my uncle's bedroom, holding the phone, feeling the temperature in the room drop degree by degree. And then I heard it, the sound Dale had described. Breathing that was not human, not animal, something else. It was coming from inside the walls. I ran. I did not pack. I did not lock the door. I just ran to my rental car and drove. I drove through the night, back toward Kodiak City where the ferry would take me off the island. But every time I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw movement in the back seat. Nothing I could focus on, just the suggestion of something there, something watching me. The ferry ride back to the mainland took 8 hours. I spent every minute of it on the deck, in the open air, surrounded by other passengers. I thought being around people would make me feel safer. It did not, because I kept noticing the way certain passengers would suddenly stop mid-conversation and look at nothing. The way their eyes would track something invisible moving through the crowd. And I realized my uncle was right. They had followed him. They were spreading. When I got back to Portland, I went straight to my apartment. I needed to think, to process, to figure out what to do with this information. But my apartment felt different. The air was wrong, too still, too heavy. I walked from room to room, and in each one, I felt that presence. That weight of being observed by something I could not see. I pulled out my uncle's map. All those X marks. I started researching the locations. The coffee shop had closed suddenly 3 months ago. The owner had a nervous breakdown and moved out of state. My office building had been experiencing bizarre electrical problems. Lights flickering. Computers crashing. Security cameras capturing movement that should not be there. And my apartment building. 3 tenants had moved out in the last year. All of them suddenly. All of them refusing to explain why. I started marking new locations on the map. Places where I felt that watching sensation. That wrongness in the air. Within a week, I had added 43 new X marks. Within 2 weeks, 97. They were everywhere. The grocery store, the gym, the park where I walked my dog. Everywhere I went, I could feel them. And worse, I was starting to almost see them. Flickers in my peripheral vision. Shapes that dissolved when I turned my head. I tried to tell people. I showed them my uncle. This research. The photographs. The maps. They looked at me with pity. With concern. One friend suggested I talk to a therapist. Another stopped returning my calls. I realized I was following the same path my uncle had walked. Isolation, paranoia, the slow realization that no one would believe me because the truth was too impossible. 3 months after finding that first photograph, I started keeping my own journal, recording the patterns I was noticing, the way they seemed to move through the city in waves, the way certain locations would suddenly feel heavy with their presence, then clear the next day, the way more and more people seemed to be seeing them, even if they did not understand what they were seeing. Last week, I saw my first one clearly. I was standing in my kitchen at 3 a.m, unable to sleep, and I looked up at the ceiling. And there it was, not invisible anymore, just there, a shape that hurt to look at directly, something that existed in a way my eyes were not designed to process. It watched me for maybe 10 seconds. Then it faded back into wherever they hide. I understood then what my uncle had learned, what drove him to spend his last years alone in that house in Alaska. They are not going away. They are not hiding. They are adapting, learning, and every day, more people can see them. More people understand that we are not alone, that we have never been alone, that something else shares this world with us, something that has been here longer than we have, something that is patient. I am writing this now because I need someone to know what happened. What is happening? My uncle tried to warn people, and they called him crazy. I tried, and they said the same about me. But the X marks keep multiplying. The sightings keep increasing. And I know that soon, everyone will see what we saw in Larsen Bay on August 17th, 2001. The difference is, this time, they are not going to leave. I can feel one watching me right now as I type these words. It is in the corner of my room, where the shadows pool deepest. And the terrible thing, the thing that keeps me awake every night, is that I am starting to understand that they are not the invaders here. We are. They have always been here. We just finally developed the ability to perceive them. And now that we can see them, now that we know they exist, everything is different. My uncle, this last journal entry makes sense to me now. We brought them back with us. He did not mean they followed him from Alaska. He meant that we carried the knowledge of them, the ability to perceive them. And that ability is contagious. It spreads from person to person like a virus. Once you know what to look for, you cannot stop seeing them. And once you see them, you teach others how to see them too. I have shown 17 people my uncle's research. 13 of them now report seeing movement in their peripheral vision, feeling presences in empty rooms, hearing that breathing sound in their walls. I am spreading it, just like my uncle did, just like everyone who witnessed the Larsen Bay event did. We are teaching humanity how to see something we were never meant to see. And they are watching us learn. Story 9. Voices below the permafrost started talking on a Tuesday in March, and by Friday, 3 men had quit the job without collecting their final paychecks. I was the foreman on a commercial construction project just outside Fairbanks, Alaska. We were breaking ground on a new storage facility, nothing fancy, just concrete and steel. The kind of work I had done 100 times before. I had a crew of 8 guys, good workers, and we were right on schedule. Everything was going perfectly until we started digging. The first time I heard it, I thought someone had left a radio on. It was around 10 in the morning, temperature sitting at -15. We had the excavator tearing into the frozen earth, ripping up chunks of permafrost the size of refrigerators. I was standing about 20 feet from the pit when I heard voices drifting up from the hole. Faint, muffled, like people having a conversation in another room. I walked to the edge and looked down. The excavator had stopped for a fuel break. The pit was maybe 12 feet deep, the walls gleaming with ice. Nothing down there but dirt and frozen ground. But the voices continued, multiple people talking over each other in a language I did not recognize. The words had a strange rhythm to them, rising and falling in patterns that felt almost musical. I called down to Martinez, our equipment operator, asked him if he heard it. He climbed out of the cab, walked over, and we both stood there listening. His face went pale. He heard it too. We shut down the excavator completely, killed the engine. The construction site went silent except for the wind, and the voices got louder. They were coming from the ground itself, from the permafrost, clear as day. Dozens of voices layered on top of each other, speaking in that unknown language, sometimes laughing, sometimes urgent, sometimes whisper soft. It sounded like we had dug into the middle of a crowded room. Martinez crossed himself and backed away from the pit. 2 other workers had come over to see what was happening. They heard it too. One of them, a younger guy named Cole, pulled out his phone and started recording. We stood there for maybe 5 minutes, just listening. The voices never stopped, never repeated, It was like tuning into a radio station from somewhere else. Somewhere impossible. I told everyone to take an early lunch while I figured out what to do. I called the project manager, explained the situation as calmly as I could. He thought I was joking. Then he thought I was drunk. Finally, he told me to send him the recording Cole had made. I watched Cole play back on his phone. The audio was distorted, crackling with static, but the voices were there. Unmistakable. The way they overlapped and interrupted each other, the strange cadence of the language, it all came through crystal clear. Cole sent the file. 20 minutes later, the project manager called back. His voice was different, tight. He told me to stop all excavation immediately and wait for further instructions. Then he hung up. We spent the rest of the day standing around in the cold, waiting. The voices continued. Sometimes they were loud enough to hear from 50 feet away. Sometimes they faded to barely a whisper, but they never stopped completely. Around 3 in the afternoon, a man showed up in a black SUV. He did not introduce himself, did not show any ID. He just walked straight to the pit, knelt at the edge, and listened. He stayed there for almost an hour, completely motionless, while the voices spoke to him from below. When he finally stood up, he looked at me with an expression I could not read. He told me that the site was being suspended pending environmental review. He said crews would come tomorrow to secure the area. Then he left without another word. That night, I could not sleep. I kept hearing the voices in my head, the rhythm of them, the way they seemed to be having real conversations, reacting to each other, pausing and responding. It was not random noise. It was communication. I started researching, found old stories about Fairbanks and the surrounding areas. The region had been inhabited for thousands of years before white settlers arrived. Indigenous peoples had lived on this land, hunted on it, built communities on it. And permafrost preserves everything. Bodies, artifacts, sounds. Some scientists believe that under certain conditions, frozen ground can trap audio vibrations, lock them in place for centuries. And when that ground is disturbed, when it thaws or cracks, those sounds can be released, like playing a recording that has been paused for 1,000 years. But that did not explain the conversations, the way the voices interacted, the laughter and urgency and emotion in their tones. The next morning, I went back to the site even though I had been told to stay away. I needed to hear it again. Needed to know I had not imagined it. The pit was still open. No crews had come to secure it. The voices were louder than before. So loud I could hear them from the parking area. I walked to the edge and looked down. The walls of the pit had changed. The ice was darker, stained, and there were shapes in it. Shadows frozen beneath the surface. Human shapes. I dropped to my knees and stared. The shapes were vague, indistinct, but unmistakably human. Dozens of them, trapped in the permafrost, preserved, and the voices were coming from them. My hands were shaking. I pulled out my phone and called the project manager, told him what I was seeing. He did not respond for a long time. Then he said that the project was being permanently canceled. The site would be filled in and abandoned. He told me not to come back, not to talk about what I had seen, but I could not let it go. Over the next week, I did more research, contacted historians, reached out to local indigenous groups, and I found something, a story that had been passed down for generations, a story about a village that disappeared during a brutal winter centuries ago. An entire community of people who vanished without a trace. The location of that village matched our construction site almost exactly. According to the legend, the people did not die. They were taken, pulled into the earth by something old and hungry, something that lived in the frozen ground. And on certain nights, when the wind was still and the temperature dropped low enough, you could hear them. Still talking, still calling out, trapped forever in the ice. I went back to the site one last time. It was late evening, the sky dark and heavy with clouds. The pit had been filled in. Fresh dirt covered everything. But I could still hear them, faint and distant, but there. Voices rising from beneath the ground. I knelt down and pressed my ear to the cold earth, and I heard my name. Not in English. In that strange, unknown language. But I understood it, felt it. They were calling to me, inviting me, welcoming me. I stood up fast, my heart hammering. Backed away from the site, got in my truck and drove. I have not been back since. But sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and the heating system clicks off, I hear them again. Whispers coming from the walls, from the floor, from beneath my bed. The same voices, the same language. They are still talking, still waiting, and I think they are getting closer. Last week, I woke up in the middle of the night with dirt under my fingernails. I do not remember digging, do not remember leaving my bed, but my hands were covered in frozen soil. and my boots were caked with mud. I am writing this because I need someone to know, need someone to understand. The permafrost is not just ground. It is a prison, and the things trapped inside are not content to stay there. If you ever find yourself in Fairbanks, and you hear voices coming from the earth, do not listen. Do not investigate, and whatever you do, do not dig. Because some things are buried for a reason, and some prisons should never be opened. I can hear them now. Right now, as I type this, they are under my house, under my foundation, calling my name in that ancient, unknowable language. And I think tonight, I might finally answer. I think tonight, I might go down and join them. Because the voices are so lonely, so desperate, and they have been waiting so long for someone to listen, someone to understand, someone to come home. The dirt is already under my nails again. My boots are by the door, and the ground beneath me is starting to shift, starting to crack, starting to open wide like a mouth ready to swallow me whole. The voices are singing now, a chorus of frozen souls, and I know what they are saying. They are saying welcome. They are saying finally. They are saying you belong with us. And the terrible truth is, I think they might be right. I think I have always belonged down there, in the dark, in the cold, in the ice that never melts and the ground that never forgets. Story 10. Red rain, the rain that fell on Cordova was the wrong color, and it changed everyone who touched it. I know because I was there. September 1995. I was working as a deckhand on a fishing trawler out of Cordova, Alaska, trying to save enough money to get back to California and finish my degree. I was 22 years old. I thought I understood how the world worked. I was wrong about everything. It started on a Tuesday morning. I remember because Tuesdays were supply runs, and I was heading into town when the sky went dark. Not storm dark, something else. The clouds looked bruised, swollen with something that was not quite rain. The air smelled like copper and salt and something organic I could not identify. Something that reminded me of the inside of a body. When the first drops hit my windshield, I thought my truck was leaking oil. The liquid was thick and red, streaking across the glass in patterns that looked almost deliberate. I turned on the wipers. They smeared it worse, creating a film that made everything look like I was seeing the world through tinted glass. Through blood. By the time I reached the harbor, the rain was coming down hard. Every surface in town was coated in red. The streets, the buildings, the boats rocking in their slips. It looked like someone had dumped 1,000 gallons of paint over everything. Except paint does not steam when it hits the ground. Paint does not make that wet, organic sound. Paint does not smell like meat. The other fishermen were standing on the docks, staring up at the sky. Nobody was running for cover. We were all just watching this impossible thing happen, trying to process what our eyes were showing us. I could feel the rain soaking through my jacket, warm against my skin. Warmer than rain should ever be. It lasted for 40 minutes. When it stopped, the entire town was drenched in red. Cars, houses, the church steeple, everything, and the silence afterward was total. No birds, no wind, just the sound of red liquid dripping from rooftops and power lines, collecting in puddles that reflected the sky like pools of blood. That night, the dream started. I have never been someone who remembers dreams. I wake up and they are gone, like smoke. But that night, I dreamed in perfect clarity. I was standing in the ocean, water up to my chest, watching something massive move beneath the surface. Something that created currents strong enough to pull me under. And I could hear it thinking. Not words exactly, more like pressure inside my skull. Ancient thoughts that had nothing to do with anything human. When I woke up, my sheets were soaked with sweat and something else. Something red and sticky that had seeped from my pores while I slept. I stripped the bed and threw everything in the wash, my hands shaking. This was not possible. None of this was possible. At the diner that morning, everyone looked exhausted. Gray skin, dark circles under bloodshot eyes. The waitress who poured my coffee had red stains under her fingernails that she kept trying to scrub away with a napkin. Nobody talked about it. We all just sat there, eating breakfast, pretending everything was normal while the windows still showed streets stained crimson. But I could see it in their eyes. They had dreamed too. We had all dreamed the same dream. 300 people in a fishing town, all standing in the ocean, all watching something massive circle beneath us. All feeling those thoughts press against the inside of our minds. The Coast Guard came on the third day. They took samples of the red rain from puddles and rooftops, scraped it off cars and buildings, filled dozens of containers and hauled them back to their lab in Anchorage. They told us not to worry. They told us it was probably algae, some kind of natural phenomenon. They told us a lot of things that we all knew were lies. A week later, They came back with the results. The public report said the rain contained biological material of unknown origin. Proteins and enzymes that did not match any known organism. Trace elements that should not exist in nature. But one of the technicians, a woman named Sarah who I had gone to high school with, pulled me aside and told me what the report really said. The red rain was alive. Not bacteria or algae, actually alive. A single massive organism that had somehow achieved liquid form. And it was old. Carbon dating put it at over 50,000 years old. Older than human civilization. Older than the last ice age. Something that had been waiting in the ocean depths. Dormant. Until something woke it up. The dreams got worse. Every night, all of us trapped in the same nightmare. Standing in deeper water now. Chest high, shoulder high. The thing beneath the surface getting closer. And those thoughts getting louder. Pressing harder. I started waking up with nosebleeds. With memories that were not mine. Images of a world before humans. Before anything we would recognize as life. A world of warm oceans and ancient things that moved through them like thoughts through a sleeping mind. People started leaving town. Families packed up and drove away in the middle of the night, not even bothering to sell their houses. The population of Cordova dropped by a third in 2 weeks. But those of us who stayed, we could not explain why. It was like something was holding us there, keeping us close to the ocean, making sure we did not stray too far from the water. I tried to leave once, got in my truck and started driving toward Anchorage. Made it maybe 30 miles before I had to pull over. The pressure in my head was unbearable, like something was squeezing my brain. I turned around and drove back, and the moment I could see the ocean again, the pressure released. I sat in my truck and cried, knowing I was trapped. The red stains never fully washed away. Even after the rain was gone, you could still see traces of it everywhere. In the cracks between sidewalk stones, in the grain of wooden buildings, seeping up through the docks. And at night, if you looked closely, you could see it moving, flowing slowly back toward the ocean, like it was alive, like it was going home. 2 months after the rain, people started changing. Nothing obvious at first, just small things. We all started walking to the beach at the same time every evening. 7:30, like clockwork. We would stand at the water's edge and stare at the waves, and nobody thought it was strange. It felt natural. It felt right. Then the sleepwalking began. I would wake up on the beach, my feet in the surf, salt water soaking my clothes. Others too, dozens of us, scattered along the shoreline, all facing the same direction, all waiting for something we could not name. The dreams shifted. Now we were not just standing in the ocean. We were walking deeper, the water rising past our necks, past our mouths, past our noses, and we were not drowning. We were breathing it, breathing the ocean like it was air, and something was coming toward us through the dark water. Something massive and patient and impossibly old. I found journals in my own handwriting that I did not remember writing. Pages and pages of notes about the thing in the ocean. About how it had been waiting for millions of years for the world to be ready. About how the red rain was just the beginning. Just the first touch. The first attempt at communication. And we were the receivers. The translators. The bridge between its world and ours. The Coast Guard came back one more time. They tried to evacuate the town. Said there was a contamination risk. A biological hazard. They wanted to move everyone to Anchorage for observation. But we refused. All of us. We stood on the docks and told them we were not leaving. And something in our eyes must have frightened them, because they left and never came back. That was 28 years ago. I am still in Cordova. We are all still here. Those of us who stayed. Those of us who were chosen. The town population never recovered. New people come sometimes, but they never stay long. They feel the wrongness in the air. They see the red stains that never fade. They hear us walking to the beach every evening at 7:30. The dreams never stopped. Every night, we walk deeper into the ocean. Every night, the water rises a little higher. Every night, that massive presence gets a little closer. And every night, we understand a little more of what it wants. What it has always wanted since before the world was shaped into continents and oceans. It wants to come home. It wants to rise from the depths where it has slept for millions of years and reclaim a world that was once entirely ocean. And we are helping it. Those of us who touched the red rain. Those of us who breathed it in and let it change us. We are the anchors, the beacons, the welcome signs. I can feel it now, even during the day. That pressure in my skull. Those ancient thoughts mixing with my own. Sometimes I cannot remember if a memory is mine or something older. Sometimes I look at my hands and they seem wrong. Too many fingers, too few, shaped for swimming rather than grasping. Last week, I coughed up something red and thick. It moved in my sink before washing down the drain. This morning, I notice gills beginning to form on my neck. Small slits that open and close when I am near the ocean. When I breathe deep, I can taste salt water in my lungs even though I am miles from the beach. We are changing, all of us, slowly becoming something else, something that can survive in the world that is coming. The world that was always meant to be. And I am not scared anymore. I should be. I know I should be. But that fear has been replaced by something deeper, something that feels like recognition, like coming home after a long journey. Tonight, we will walk to the beach again at 7:30. Tomorrow night too, and the night after that, walking deeper each time, breathing the ocean, becoming part of something vast and ancient and patient. And eventually, we will not come back. We will walk into the waves and keep walking down into the depths where it waits, where it has always been waiting. And when we reach it, when we finally merge with that massive consciousness in the dark water, the red rain will fall again. In other coastal towns, other fishing villages, other places where the ocean touches the land, and more people will dream, more people will change, more people will walk into the waves and not return. The world is mostly ocean. Always has been. We just forgot that we are visitors here, temporary things living on borrowed land. But the ocean remembers. And now, it is calling us home. Story 11. Tunnel that eats memory. I drove through the Whittier Tunnel 3 times before I realized I had never made it to the other side. It was October 1973, and I was hauling freight from Anchorage to the tiny port town of Whittier. The tunnel was the only way through the mountain. 2.5 miles of darkness carved through solid rock. 1 lane. Trains and cars shared the same passage, alternating on a strict schedule. Miss your window and you wait another hour in the cold. I made the crossing at 4:47 p.m. I remember checking my watch as I entered because I was running 5 minutes ahead of schedule. The tunnel swallowed my truck whole. Fluorescent lights mounted on the walls flickered past in a hypnotic rhythm. The sound of my engine echoed off the concrete, creating a droning chorus that filled my skull. Halfway through, the lights went out. Not gradually, all at once. Complete darkness. My headlights carved 2 weak tunnels through the black, illuminating maybe 30 feet of roadway. I slowed down, waiting for the lights to flicker back on. They did not. Then I saw the rubble, a massive pile of shattered concrete and twisted metal blocking the tunnel ahead. Fresh dust hung in the air, caught in my headlights like fog. I slammed on the brakes. The truck shuddered to a stop maybe 10 feet from me. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it over the engine. I sat there, hands gripping the wheel, trying to process what I was seeing. The collapse must have just happened. Seconds ago, if I had been going full speed, I would have driven straight into it. I threw the truck into reverse, planning to back out the way I came. But when I looked in my mirror, there was rubble behind me too. The tunnel had collapsed on both sides. I was trapped in the middle. The engine died. I turned the key. Nothing. Not even a click. The headlights faded to black. I was sitting in total darkness, sealed inside a mountain, with no way out and no way to call for help. This was before cell phones, before GPS. I had a CB radio, but it was dead too. Everything electrical in the truck had stopped working. I waited. What else could I do? Someone would notice the collapse. Rescue teams would come. I just had to stay calm and wait. Time became strange in the darkness. I could not see my watch. Could not tell if minutes or hours were passing. The silence was absolute. No dripping water, no shifting rocks, just my own breathing and the sound of blood rushing in my ears. Then I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, boots on concrete, coming from somewhere ahead of me. I pressed my face against the windshield, straining to see. A light appeared in the distance. A flashlight beam, swinging back and forth as someone walked toward my truck. Relief flooded through me. Rescue workers. They had come faster than I expected. The figure approached. The flashlight beam stayed pointed at the ground, so I could not see who was holding it. When they got within 20 feet of my truck, they stopped. Just stood there, silent. I opened my door. The sound of the hinges creaking echoed through the tunnel like a scream. I called out, asking if they were here to help. The figure did not respond, did not move. The flashlight beam stayed fixed on the same spot of ground. I climbed down from the cab. My legs were shaking. I walked toward the figure, one hand trailing along the side of my truck for balance. As I got closer, the flashlight clicked off. I stopped, called out again. Nothing. Then the flashlight clicked back on, pointed directly at my face. I threw up my hand to shield my eyes from the glare. Behind the light, I could make out the shape of a person in a reflective safety vest. Rescue worker uniform. But something was wrong. The proportions were off. The head was too smooth. Too round. I lowered my hand slowly, letting my eyes adjust. And I saw what was holding the flashlight. No face, just smooth, blank skin where features should have been. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, nothing. I stumbled backward. My boot caught on something and I went down hard, landing on my tailbone. Pain shot up my spine. The figure with no face stood perfectly still. Flashlight trained on me as I scrambled back toward my truck. More lights appeared, dozens of them, flashlight beams cutting through the darkness from every direction, and figures emerging from the shadows, all wearing safety vests, all with the same smooth, featureless faces. They moved toward me in perfect silence. No footsteps now, no sound at all, just the lights getting closer and closer. I hauled myself up and ran toward the rubble pile behind my truck, thinking maybe I could climb over it. But when I reached it, the rubble was gone. The tunnel stretched out behind me, clear and empty. The lights were back on, fluorescent, flickering. I spun around. My truck was gone. The figures were gone. I was standing alone in the middle of the tunnel, and at the far end, maybe half a mile away, I could see daylight. I ran toward it. My lungs burned. My legs felt like lead. But I ran until I burst out into the gray afternoon light on the Whittier side of the mountain. Cars were parked along the roadside. People were milling around. Normal people, real people, with faces. I bent over, hands on my knees, gasping for air. Someone asked if I was okay. I tried to explain what happened, but the words came out wrong. Jumbled. A state trooper was there. He walked me to his car and had me sit down. Asked me to describe what I experienced. I told him about the collapse, the darkness, the faceless rescue workers. He wrote everything down with this carefully neutral expression. When I finished, he told me there had been no collapse. The tunnel was fine, completely operational. I had been found wandering on foot on the Whittier side about an hour ago. My truck was still parked at the Anchorage entrance. I had never driven through. I insisted I had been trapped inside. He just nodded and kept writing. Then he told me I was the 7th person that month to report the exact same experience. Same tunnel collapse that never happened. Same faceless figures in safety vests. Same lost time. They were conducting a study. Psychologists were involved. They thought it might be carbon monoxide hallucinations, or mass hysteria, some kind of shared delusion triggered by the claustrophobia of the tunnel. But I knew what I had experienced was real. The cold concrete under my hands, the smell of dust and diesel, the way my heart nearly exploded when I saw those blank faces. The trooper drove me back to Anchorage. My truck was right where he said it would be. Keys in the ignition. Everything normal, except my watch had stopped at 4:47 p.m., the exact moment I entered the tunnel. I never drove through Whittier Tunnel again. Took the long route around whenever I had deliveries to the port. Added 6 hours to the trip. Did not care, but about 3 months later, I got a letter. No return address. Inside was a single photograph. Black and white, grainy. It showed the interior of the tunnel. And in the center of the frame was my truck. My exact truck, license plate visible, surrounded by figures in safety vests. All of them facing the camera. All of them with smooth, blank faces where their features should have been. I burned the photograph, tried to forget about it. But last year, I got another letter. Same lack of return address. This one contained a photocopy of a newspaper article from 1952. 21 years before my experience. The article described a real tunnel collapse during construction. 12 workers were killed, buried alive under tons of rock. Their bodies were never recovered. The tunnel was simply built around them. Someone had circled one sentence in red ink. It said the workers had been part of an experimental safety crew testing new reflective vests. The article included a group photo of the crew, 12 men standing in a line, but their faces were damaged in the photocopy, blurred out, reduced to smooth, featureless ovals. I moved to California, put as much distance between myself and Alaska as I could. But sometimes, when I am driving through any tunnel, any dark enclosed space, my watch stops. The lights go out, and I hear footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate, getting closer, and I know they are still looking, still reaching, still trying to pull me back into that place between the rock and the darkness where time does not move and faces cease to exist and 12 dead men work forever in the black, waiting for someone to join them. Someone had circled one sentence in red ink. It said the workers had been part of an experimental safety crew testing new reflective vests. The article included a group photo of the crew, 12 men standing in a line, but their faces were damaged in the photocopy, blurred out, reduced to smooth, featureless ovals. I moved to California, put as much distance between myself and Alaska as I could. But sometimes, When I am driving through any tunnel, any dark enclosed space, my watch stops. The lights go out, and I hear footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate, getting closer, and I know they are still looking, still reaching, still trying to pull me back into that place between the rock and the darkness where time does not move and faces cease to exist and 12 dead men work forever in the black, waiting for someone to join them. Story 12. Shadow Whales of Juneau. I should have turned back the moment my depth finder went dead 30 miles northwest of Juneau. But the charter group had paid triple my usual rate, cash up front, and my mortgage was 3 months behind. That decision haunts me worse than what I saw beneath those black waters. The Inside Passage had been my workplace for 20 years. I knew every current, every rocky outcrop, every whale migration pattern between Ketchikan and Skagway. Other captains whispered about the shadow whales at the docks, usually after too many beers. Massive dark shapes, they said, bigger than blue whales, that moved wrong and never surfaced. I dismissed it as exhaustion mixed with folklore. The ocean plays tricks on tired eyes. My passengers that October morning were awed from the start. 3 men in expensive outdoor gear who barely spoke, carrying sealed metal cases they wouldn't let me touch. They wanted to reach a specific coordinate in Stevens Passage, nowhere near the usual fishing spots or whale watching areas. Just empty water over an underwater canyon that dropped nearly 2,000 feet. The fog rolled in thick as we left Auke Bay, reducing visibility to maybe 50 yards. My radar worked fine, showing nothing but open water ahead. The depth finder read normal depths, then suddenly nothing. Not malfunction numbers or error codes, just blank, like the ocean floor had vanished. I tapped the screen, checked connections. The unit was working perfectly. It simply couldn't find bottom. That's when I felt the boat shift. Not from waves or wind, but like something had passed underneath, displacing massive amounts of water. My 40-foot vessel lifted slightly, then settled. The fog seemed to pulse, growing denser. One passenger stood at the stern with binoculars, scanning the flat, gray surface. Another opened one of their cases, pulling out equipment I didn't recognize. Electronic devices with multiple antennas, underwater microphones on long cables. They lowered the hydrophones into the water. Within seconds, I heard it through their speakers, a sound that made my teeth ache and my chest tighten. Not whale song, though it had that quality of traveling through water. This was deeper, more metallic, like submarine hull groans mixed with something organic. Something breathing. The man with headphones went pale. He gestured frantically to the others, who began adjusting dials with shaking hands. The sound changed, became almost musical, but wrong. Imagine a church organ played underwater while the pipes slowly filled with mud. It surrounded us, coming from every direction, growing louder. I looked over the side and my blood turned to ice water. A shadow moved beneath us, but shadow isn't the right word. It was darker than shadow, a void in the water that hurt to perceive directly. The shape stretched longer than my boat, wider too, undulating with impossible anatomy. Not swimming like a whale or fish, but flowing, reshaping itself as it moved. The depth finder suddenly screamed back to life, showing something massive rising from 2,000 feet. Fast? Too fast for any living creature. The number counted down rapidly. 1,500 feet. 1,500. But looking down, I saw only that living darkness, now close enough that I could make out details that shouldn't exist. Surfaces that weren't quite skin or scales, but something between. Appendages that weren't fins or tentacles, but served similar purposes while defying natural design. My passengers were shouting, though the blood rushing in my ears drowned them out. One threw his equipment overboard, the expensive machinery sinking instantly as if grabbed and pulled down. Another was taking photos with a camera that clicked frantically on automatic. The third had collapsed, clutching his head, blood trickling from his nose. The boat lurched violently, not hit from below, but pulled. We were moving without engine power, dragged sideways through the water at increasing speed. The fog swirled around us, forming patterns that looked almost like symbols or writing. The hydrophone sounds had become deafening, that organic metallic breathing now mixed with something else. Voices, almost, not human, but structured like language, speaking in frequencies that made my bones vibrate. I grabbed the radio, tried to call Mayday, but only static came through. Not normal static, it had rhythm, patterns, like coded messages in the white noise. The GPS showed impossible coordinates, numbers that shouldn't exist, changing too fast to read. We were being pulled toward something, and I knew with terrible certainty that we were meant to go there. That this wasn't random. We'd been selected. The photographer was still shooting when his camera exploded. Not from impact, but like the internal mechanisms had been twisted from within. He screamed, dropping the sparking remains. Through the fog ahead, I saw lights. Not from any vessel or aircraft. These were beneath the surface, arranged in geometric patterns that shifted and reconfigured. They pulsed in sync with the sounds, growing brighter as we approached. The shadow beneath us had friends. Dozens of them, rising from the deep. Their void-like forms creating whirlpools of darkness in the gray water. Some were larger than the first, impossibly vast, their true size hidden by the limits of vision. They moved in coordination, performing some kind of ritual or dance around us. The man with the nosebleed was speaking now, but not in English. Not in any language that should come from human vocal cords. He was repeating what he heard in the hydrophones, becoming a translator for something that should never be translated. I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed a flare gun and fired it straight down into the water. The red light penetrated maybe 10 feet before being swallowed by that living darkness. But the shadows recoiled, just slightly, enough for me to break free from whatever trance had frozen me. I gunned the engine, spinning the wheel hard to port. The boat responded sluggishly, still being pulled, but now fighting against it. The things below didn't like that. The water around us began to boil, not from heat but from movement. Thousands of smaller shadows, spawned or summoned from the larger ones, swirled up toward the surface. They looked like fish from a distance, but up close, they were something else. Each one was wrong in a different way, as if they were failed attempts at mimicking marine life, getting the basic shape right but missing crucial details about how living things should be assembled. We broke free suddenly, the boat lurching forward so hard I nearly went over the wheel. Behind us, the fog formed a wall, perfectly vertical, stopping at an invisible border. Through that fog wall, those lights still pulsed, watching. The hydrophone man had stopped his alien speaking and was sobbing, pulling the cables up frantically. When the hydrophone emerged, it was covered in something black and viscous that wasn't oil or algae. It moved slightly, trying to maintain shape before dissolving into the sea. I pushed the engine beyond safe limits, racing back toward Juneau. My passenger said nothing, wouldn't even look at each other. One kept checking his phone, typing messages that wouldn't send, deleting them, typing again. The coordinates they'd given me were burned into my memory, but when I checked my charts later, that area showed normal depth readings. The official map said we'd been over a flat bottom, maybe 300 feet deep. The canyon wasn't supposed to exist. We reached Auke Bay as the sun broke through the clouds. Normal sunlight had never looked so beautiful. My passengers unloaded their remaining equipment without a word, handed me another envelope of cash, and drove away in a black SUV with government plates. I never saw them again, never learned their names. But I know they knew. They knew what was down there and had come to confirm it, or communicate with it, or God knows what else. I sold my boat 2 weeks later, moved inland to Fairbanks. I work construction now, stay away from deep water, but sometimes, on quiet nights, I still hear those sounds. That metallic breathing, those almost voices speaking in impossible frequencies. I dream of shadows moving beneath ice, growing larger, spreading through underwater canyons that don't appear on any map. Other captains still sail the inside passage. Some report equipment failures, mysterious currents, shadows too large to be whales. Most convince themselves it is nothing. But I know the truth. Those things aren't shadows. They are holes in reality, spaces where something else exists, something that watches from below and waits. The shadow whales of Juneau aren't whales at all. They scouts or guards, or maybe just the smallest visible part of something vast beyond human comprehension. First, check marine traffic websites obsessively now, looking for patterns. Ships that change course suddenly, fishing vessels that report empty nets in waters that should be teeming with life, research expeditions that end abruptly without explanation. It's happening more frequently. Whatever is down there is becoming active, less careful about being seen. The inside passage hides them well, all that deep, dark water between islands, those underwater trenches that plunge beyond sonar's reach. But they are not confined there. They can go wherever the ocean is deep enough, dark enough. They re-spreading, searching, preparing for something. I should have turned back when my equipment failed, should have refused that charter, stayed in familiar waters. But maybe it wouldn't have mattered. Maybe they would have found another way to show themselves, to make sure someone knew. Someone who would survive, who would carry the knowledge inland, spreading the word that the ocean holds more than whales and fish. It holds doors to other places, and those doors are opening. The mortgage on my old house in Juneau is still unpaid. Sometimes I think about going back, taking one more boat out to those coordinates. Not to see them again, but to understand why they let us go. What purpose did we serve? Were we messengers, witnesses, or just entertainment for intelligences too vast to comprehend human fear? I want to go back. But every night, when sleep finally comes, I'm there anyway. Floating above that impossible canyon while shadows the size of buildings rise toward me, their non-surfaces rippling with patterns that spell out messages in languages that predate human speech. They were trying to tell me something, those shadow whales. And the worst part is, I am beginning to understand. And so the whisper fades into the wind. Alaska keeps its secrets under ice, but sometimes, for a moment, it lets us peek inside. If you haven't already, subscribe and tap that bell. More true stories and legends wait in the dark. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from, or if you felt the chill of something unexplainable yourself. Share it in the comments. Midnight Whispers isn't just a channel, it's a campfire across the miles, burning in the endless night. Until next time, stay warm and keep your lights low.